I think I've done it correctly this time. I think I initially clicked the wrong button, so hopefully it's working now, and we'll be starting in 40 seconds with this English lesson about parts, live English lesson. So hopefully in just a moment, the live stream kicks off. It looks like it's starting. That's awesome. We'll start in 21 seconds. This might be the first live English lesson that's starting a couple seconds later than normal. It seems like everything's working. We'll start in about 6 seconds. Let me get ready. Well, hello and welcome to this English lesson about parts. Now you might be wondering, what is this lesson about? What is Bob going to be teaching us this morning? What are parts? Well, if you have a car or a lawnmower or a bicycle or a sewing machine, if you have any kind of machine, it's made out of parts. And that's the term we use when we talk about screws and bolts and springs and gears and sprockets. We're talking about all of the parts that you will find in any kind of machine. On the farm here, I have tractors. We have vans that we drive. We have air conditioners that keep our flowers cool. We have a lot of different things, and they all have parts in them. So this is a bit of a technical lesson, but I think this is worthwhile for everyone who is learning English. This isn't just a lesson for those who are mechanics or engineers, but it will also help you a lot if that is your career. So once again, parts are all of the little pieces that we have inside of machines, and welcome to this English lesson about parts. Before we get started, just a couple things. I do want to make sure this is streaming properly, because I think I started like a different lesson by clicking the wrong button. It looks like it's working well. People in the chat seem to be chatting away. I should just say hi to everyone in the chat. Let me do that. Hi, everyone. Do remember to use the chat to have fun English conversations with each other. Hello to Lolly Lolly, Abbas, Huawei, Zeev, Ken, Madi is here, Bertha, Bastin, Umberto. Let me scroll back. I know Vitor and Unsol are here. Ralph, John from Brazil, Wanda is here, Nima, Unsol, I think I said Unsol already, Yaroslav is here as well. Good to see all of your familiar names in the chat. Hey, if you have a question during this lesson, there is a link that Dave will share in the chat that you can use to go to a form. It's also in the description below. And Dave says in the chat, yep, looks like it's working for me. To me. Bad English, Dave. Sorry. I have to laugh at Dave's English for just a moment. Hey, Brent is here from Speak English with This Guy. Good to see you too, Brent. Always nice to see another English teacher in the chat as well. But I think maybe we should get this lesson started. Again, this is about parts. I'm talking mostly about the parts of machines. I'm not talking about body parts. Maybe I'll do a lesson on that in the future. But we'll see how that goes. In the chat, Freddie says there are also many parts in the human body. Oh, yes. Yeah, there definitely are. This lesson will not cover that, but maybe a future one will. And then Yaroslav says, can I ask you to make a lesson on the Army any other day? Yeah, I could do another military lesson specifically on the Army. Someday I will do that. But there are a lot of vocabulary words to cover. I should get started. Let's do that. Dave says I've been called out. Yes, just a little bit. Not a big deal. Even English speakers make mistakes sometimes. A socket. So a socket is any kind of hole that something goes into. So if you look on the front of your car, you have headlights and there is a light bulb in there. That light bulb goes into a socket. So a socket is usually used to describe something electrical, although it doesn't have to be. This is a very common use of it. And that is probably the best example. A light bulb goes into a socket. On my van, the turn signal stopped working and I put a new bulb in the socket, but that didn't fix it because the socket actually needed to be replaced. So a socket is anything where something goes into it. a belt. So often there are moving parts in a vehicle or on another piece of equipment or in a machine. And sometimes you have to get the power from one section to another section. And there are many ways to do this. One way is for you to have belts. In a car, if you open the hood, I think it's called is it called the boot? I'm not sure what it's called in British English. This is a very North American English lesson, by the way. A belt is used to connect two pulleys. So the pulley is the round part. The belt is the black part that connects the two. When the one pulley turns, the power that is making that pulley turn goes through the belt to the other pulley. So the belt is the part that connects the two pulleys. If you are curious to see belts and pulleys, just open the hood of your vehicle if you have one today, and you will see at least one or two belts and many, many pulleys. And then, of course, you have what's called a chain, and chains are often connected to sprockets. Now, don't get confused. This is a socket. This is a sprocket. They sound the same, but they are very different. Similar to how two pulleys can be connected with a belt, two sprockets can be connected with a chain. The most common sprocket and chain system would be on a bicycle. If you have a bicycle, you can go and look and you will see a sprocket at the front. There might be 2 or 3, and then there might be 1, 2, or 5 or 6 sprockets at the back, and connecting them will be a chain. So we would call it a bike chain, but there are chains used in all kinds of different pieces of equipment. But probably the most common would be on a bicycle. And a gear. So the difference between a sprocket and a gear. A sprocket will never connect to another sprocket. A sprocket is always designed to have a chain. I really like saying the word sprocket. That's a fun word to say. A gear, however, connects to another gear. If you were to take apart the transmission in your vehicle, don't do that. Only a mechanic should do that. You would find inside lots of gears. They're usually made of steel. When one gear turns, it turns another gear. And then you have different gear ratios. So when a small gear connects to a bigger gear, it might be a ratio of when this gear turns once, the small gear turns twice. A little too technical. I wasn't going to get that technical in this lesson, but I'm having fun, so I might explain more things than I had originally planned. Pulleys and gears are usually on the end of a shaft. A shaft is a very strong piece of metal or steel that can turn. On the end, it will probably have a gear or pulley or maybe even a sprocket. But that shaft is used to transfer the power laterally in a system. If this is too technical for you, I apologize. This lesson was highly requested, though, by a lot of engineers, mechanics, farmers, and people who like to fix things. So hopefully you realize a lot of this vocabulary is very common, but the way I describe it might be a little too technical. So I'll try my best to keep things clear and simple. Sometimes you will have a pin in the end of a bolt or in the end of a shaft. This, I think, is called a split pin. It might be called a cotter pin. Don't quote me on that. But often when I fix my lawnmower, I have to take a pin out in order to remove certain parts in order to be able to fix it. Generally in English, any small piece of metal that goes through a hole like that, we would call a pin. And you can also use it as a verb. Sometimes you need to pin things together. We talked about this in the lesson about things inside of other things. A bearing is something that we use so things turn smoothly. If you were to put a shaft through another piece of metal without a bearing, there would be a lot of friction and it would generate heat. But when you put a bearing in, it spins freely. Every tire on your car has a bearing at the center. On your bicycle, at the center of each wheel, there is a bearing. This is what allows those things to turn freely. And just a general description, anytime we connect one part to another part with something like this, we call it a rod. A rod generally doesn't turn. It's usually used to just connect one piece to another piece. So if you have, these are called tie rods. They connect one piece of your front end of a car to the other end. So any kind of straight piece of metal that connects two things, we would call a rod. And then the general term for anything else would just be a bar. So this piece of equipment has a long bar along the back. If you were to look in the back of my van, there is a bar that goes across. So this is probably just a general term that we often use to describe anything long that's between two other things. Hey, let's do some questions. Let me check the audio on this. I'm going to try and not speak too quickly, but I do have 56 vocabulary words to teach, so I will try to keep moving along. Here we go. First question from Yarrow. Morning, the wisest teacher, Bob. It's been a while. Thanks for the useful lesson. No questions. Have a good one. Thanks, Yarrow. Good to see you here this morning. And I'm glad you think the lesson is useful. I think it'll be a very popular lesson when people watch it on repeat. Let's see. From Nima, hello, dear teacher Bob. I just wanted to point out this expression related to this topic. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of something. Thank you very much, sir. So yes, I will be getting into the nuts and bolts, all of the details of this lesson, and I will even be talking about nuts and bolts. Let's see here. Renata. Hello, Bob. I heard someone say in a YouTube video, this video is going to be a two-parter. Is it common, or should I say this is going to be a two-part video? Thanks. People say two-parter a lot. I almost made this lesson a two-parter because it's a pretty long lesson and I kept thinking of things. So yes, both are correct. I could say this is going to be a two-part lesson, or this is going to be a two-parter. This isn't a two-parter, by the way. I'm going to do it in one shot. From Agsmed, hello teacher, could you give examples using with thanks? I watch your videos from Somalia. So I think, are you asking for examples of the phrase with thanks? What I would recommend is that come tomorrow. I'm doing a live lesson tomorrow and I will try to answer that question. For today, I'm going to try and stay on topic. Ivan, hi Bob, do you have a boat or sports car on your farm? No, little fix there, on your farm. We have 2 kayaks and 2 old minivans. That's what we have. No sports cars here. I do have a really old tractor though in the shed. Let's see here. I'm going to skip the question that's not on topic. But Andre, if you ask tomorrow, I will happily answer that. Let's see here. Orsi. What is the name of the outer glass part of the bulb? I think you used the word envelope, like a letter envelope, in one of the previous lessons. Am I right? We just call, like with a light bulb, the glass part is simply the bulb. Like that's what we refer to as the bulb. The bulb broke. Or you might just say the glass broke. The glass of the bulb broke. Nathan, do bikes use spokes? So I have to drop the R out of there. Do bikes use spokes? Yes. Bikes have spokes from the center of the bike to the outer part. So the center of the bike tire to the outer part. The long rods, that's another place where we'd use rod, is called a spoke. A specific type of rod. In Canada, do you think horseshoes bring good luck? This is from Lolly Lolly. I don't, but some people still hang them above the doors of their barns because they think they do. So a horseshoe is a part. It goes on a horse's hoof. So I guess you could say it's part of the old style of transportation. Katab, hi, hey teacher, I don't have a question. I just wanted to say thank you very much. This lesson helps me a lot in the field I work. You are very welcome, Katab. Let's see here. This is from, I want to say Rebaz, but sometimes I say Rebaz, and I still haven't learned to say it right. Hi, hello, dear teacher, dear Mr. Bob from Kurdistan in northern Iraq. Just wanted to say hi to you, though you haven't learned my name correctly yet. LOL, much regards. I tried to pronounce it the other day, but I did not get it correct. From Peter, hello, Mr. Bob. Today you have a great topic. No question today. I wish you have a nice day. God bless you. Thank you very much, Peter. Ario, hello, Mr. Bob. Hello, how are you, Mr. Bob? Parts, could please explain. Oh, could you please explain to me about the lesson? Yes. If you get a screwdriver and you open something up, inside it will have parts. My camera has parts inside of it. My van, my car has parts inside of it. So this lesson is about all of those parts, at least all the ones that I could think of. Rainus, hello, Mr. Bob. Are these words known to anyone who speaks English as their native language, or are they only for specialists in this industry? So everything I am teaching you is a common word that native English speakers would know. They seem very specific, and it seems like a very technical lesson. But if you own a lawnmower or a bicycle or a vehicle, you would know these words. Like when I talk about belt or pulley, if your mechanic has to fix your car, he might call and say, you need a new belt, or the pulley on your engine is broken. So these are words that people know. When I describe them, I'm very technical, but these are very, very common English words, certainly very much. You can ask if Brent from Speak English with This Guy is still here. Ask him if these are common words in English. He will probably confirm that. We'll see how much Brent knows about parts. From Ruslan, hello, dear teacher Bob. No questions today. I just want to thank you for such a nice channel. Best wishes, sir. You are welcome. Let's see here. Oh, from Alexi. Hi, sir. Why do they put excess parts in machines? Every time I try to fix something, there was always a few extra ones. There's a joke in English, and I'm sure you have this joke in other languages as well, about how when you buy a piece of furniture, maybe from IKEA, when you're done putting it together, you always have parts left over, and everyone thinks those must be extra, but maybe it's because you didn't follow the instructions properly. That could be. Okay, let's get back to the lesson. As I said, I need to keep moving. Otherwise, we won't get through this. Here we go. Arm. So anytime there is parts that kind of do the same thing that a human arm does, we call it an arm. My microphone is on an arm. This microphone is on an arm. We don't call the part that bends an elbow or a wrist when we talk about this. We would simply just say, I have an arm to hold my microphone. This arm is connected to a mic stand. So the part that goes this way is a stand, but this part here, this part right here, I would call an arm. And then of course, some basic things. Anytime you need to have electricity in a piece of equipment or a vehicle, you would use wires. Wires generally have copper on the inside. We sometimes even call it copper wire. That's the metal that it's made out of. But if you want your signal lights to work or your turning signals to work on a vehicle, there has to be a wire that goes to that light. And we would call this a harness. When you have a whole bunch of wires together and there is a connector on the end of some of them, we would call this here a harness. In a vehicle, there are so many wires, they sometimes come to the same place. When a whole bunch of wires come to the same place like this, we call it a harness or a wiring harness. This might be one of the lessons, or this might be one of the vocab words that's a little more technical. And then connector. Anytime you have a spot where you can connect or disconnect wires, we call it a connector. In Canada, if you hook a trailer up to a vehicle, there's usually a connector like this on the back. This is one of the styles, and you can use that to connect the electricity from the van or the car to the trailer. So sometimes at the end of wires, you will have a connector. And then, of course, there's cable. Now, we sometimes call this a cable. Sometimes a cable has electricity going through it. So cable and wire are sometimes used interchangeably in English. Like there's a lot of cables in my van. There's a lot of wires in my van. But we also use cable to talk about this type of thing. A cable is kind of like a metal rope or a metal string. Cables are almost always made out of metal or steel. They're very, very strong. And if you look, there's probably cables in a vehicle somewhere that connect things together so that they move at the same time. So Brent says, absolutely, very common in English. I'm just not as handy around the house as Bob. I usually ruin what I'm trying to fix. I always explain vocabulary like this as you don't have to know how to fix stuff, but you need to understand the person who is fixing stuff for you. So always good to know. And then a strap. If you have a pickup truck or if you have a trailer and you put something in it, you use a strap to secure it so it doesn't fly out or blow away. Or if you go over a bump, you don't want it to go to fly out of the back. That's how we describe it in English. I shouldn't tell this story. My sister would be very angry. But once my sister bought a really nice outdoor chair and she put it in the back of her pickup truck and she didn't have a strap. She didn't have any straps. So she couldn't secure it. And when she was driving home, it flew out into the ditch and it broke. It's a very sad day for her. I won't tell you which sister it was. This is a common thing that is used in a lot of places, and we call it a zip tie or a cable tie. When you put the one end into the other, it goes zzz, like it zips, and then as you pull it, it gets tighter, and then you can't undo it. You have to cut it to undo it. So often when there are a lot of wires in a vehicle or in a piece of equipment, there will be a zip tie holding those things together. Anything that shoots water, mostly water, it can shoot other things as well, would be called a nozzle. We have on our farm, in order to deal with bugs, sometimes we have a sprayer and it has a nozzle at the end. So instead of the water coming out straight, it spreads it out. When you're driving I'm trying to do windshield wiper. When you're driving your vehicle and your windshield wipers are going, you can spray windshield washer fluid on them because there's two little nozzles. So when your windshield wipers are going, if it's not raining, you can shoot some windshield washer fluid through the nozzles onto your windshield. Magnets. So magnets are really cool things. They attract metal, and sometimes magnets are used as parts for different things. I have a little door in my van that when I close it, a magnet holds it shut. I have a little clip that I can put a camera on, and it's magnetic, so I can stick it onto things that are metal. So magnets are pretty cool parts. If you take apart a speaker, the thing that makes sound, there is a magnet inside of that as well. A shield. So a shield is any piece, usually metal, a part of the car or other equipment that protects something. So here you have a shield that protects the rest of the car from the heat of the muffler. Sometimes you might have a shield to protect people so they don't touch things they shouldn't touch. Often when you have two pulleys and a belt, there will be a shield in front of that so that people don't accidentally touch it when it's running. So a shield is usually metal, and it's the part of anything that's meant to protect you or protect the rest of the machine. So there's a switch. There's also a toggle switch. This could be called a toggle switch too, but a switch is anything you use to turn stuff on and off. So often when I get in my van, I will push a switch so the windshield wipers go. There's also on my one tractor a toggle switch that you have to flip in order to start the tractor. A toggle switch can be either on or off, and it's either in one position or the other. You can toggle it. That's also an English verb. And then of course, button. A button is simply something you push. The other day, my van was in the garage and they gave me a loaner vehicle. They gave me a car to drive. They gave me a car that I could use while my van was being fixed. And you didn't have to turn the key. You just pushed a button and the car started. It's really cool. I know most modern cars do that, but that was pretty fun for me. And then normally in a car, I would call this, in Canada, we would call this the ignition or the ignition switch. The spot where you put your key and turn, we call that the ignition. When you're trying to start a vehicle, you could say, turn the ignition, see if it will start. So the ignition switch goes from off to on, and then you can go one more and that starts the vehicle and it goes back to on. But I would simply call this the ignition. And then this caused some controversy last time I talked about it. I call this a lever. Some people call this a lever. I'm going to keep calling it a lever. It's anything where it's like a rod that comes up with a handle, and it allows you to change a setting. Okay, so on my tractors in particular, there are a lot of levers, and those levers do different things. If you want to call it a lever, you can, but I'm going to keep calling it a lever. So real quick, and then I will do a few more questions. Here we go. This is a bolt. This is a nut. This is a wing nut. This is a washer. So back to the beginning, a bolt has an end that you can put a wrench on. A wrench is a tool that you use to tighten a bolt. And the other end is threaded. That's the end where you can put a nut on. Okay, so if we look here, this is a bolt. This is the nut that goes on the end. This is a wing nut. You can tighten a wing nut by hand, but a normal nut, you need a wrench to tighten it. Okay, so a wing nut is just easier to do. Sometimes when a wing nut is really tight, you do have to use pliers to undo it, but a wing nut you can usually do by hand. And a washer is used with a bolt and a nut just to hold things better, or to add space, or to make it stronger. And then sometimes we use a lock washer. A lock washer will actually stop the bolt from coming loose. It actually acts as a little spring to hold the bolt and nut together better. I'm not going to explain all the details, but when you put a lock washer on with a bolt and nut, it creates outward tension, which holds everything in place. So again, this is a nut. It's on the threaded end of the bolt. Okay, so this bolt is threaded. That's all of the grooves at the far end. The nut goes on to the threaded end. If you want, you can use a wing nut, and you might need a washer or a lock washer. And then just to repeat something I've taught a couple times before, this is a screw. A screw is different than a bolt because a screw doesn't have a nut on the end. So you can turn a screw, you can screw the screw into a piece of wood or into a piece of metal. But yeah, that's a screw, slightly different than a bolt, but kind of the same idea, used to hold two things together. Okay, let me do a few more questions and let's do members only chat. If you're one of the many people who are watching, 354, that's a lot. Popular lesson. Do stick around because I will finish off the lesson in just a little bit. But for now, let's do some questions from the forum and I'll answer questions directly from the chat as well. Eugene from Automation Secure Home says, I use a lot of lock washers to install outdoor smart TV. They're very handy. Like whenever I fix something on the farm, if I'm putting a bolt with a nut, I almost always use a lock washer just so I know it won't come apart later. From Winter Wright. Hello, Bob. It's not easy for me to know the difference between spare parts and accessories. Have a nice day. So spare parts would be like for my van, I have an extra set of tires. I would say those are spare tires or spare parts. Accessories would be things that make things better. So in my van, I have a lot of accessories. I have a stereo, power windows, air conditioning. We would call those extras or accessories. Let's see. Fred survived to... Oh yeah, sorry, France and Europe. The wildfire smoke made it all the way to France a few days ago. So I really hope that we get those under control soon. Hi, Bob. No question today. Just huge thanks to let us improve our English knowledge in so many efficient topics, even though they're technical. À demain, c'est sûr. No problem, Fred. Let's see here. From Alexander. Hello, Bob. Thanks for meaningful stream. I have a question. Are there short names for right-hand drive cars? No. So in Canada, we drive on the right side of the road, but we sit on the left side of the vehicle. I think we would just say right-hand drive. Our mailman used to have a right-hand drive car. It was pretty cool. Let's see here. Hafiez has a sad story. Good morning, Coach Bob. Sad day for me. I'm watching using a tablet because I spilled coffee on my laptop. Lots of liquid had seeped into the internal parts. It's dead now. I'm very sorry to hear that. It is so sad when a piece of equipment stops working because the parts inside are all wet with coffee. I've seen that happen a couple of times at school. Let's see here. Next question from Fatima. Hi, Bob. Hope you're doing well. What do we hold a nut with? So generally, you use 2 wrenches to tighten a nut and bolt. You can also use what's called a ratchet. A ratchet takes a socket and it allows you to, it goes, actually, no, it goes, not going the wrong way. I think I did a lesson a long time ago on tools. You could go to that lesson. I think I talk about ratchets. Okay, from Freddie Wolf. To avoid so I'm going to fix this, Freddie. To avoid bolts coming loose. That's how we would describe that in English. There's kinds of special glue. Yes, there's Loctite. There's also nuts that have nylon inside. I've seen those as well. But yes, that's how we would say it. To avoid bolts coming loose, there's kinds of glue. Yeah. And then, New Words gifted a lesson or a membership to Quan. Very, very cool. Thank you very much for that. New Words with MP. That's awesome. And then Brent says, Happy Canada Day. How are you celebrating tomorrow? Yes, it is Canada Day tomorrow. I'm celebrating by having a live stream at 10 a.m. But Jen and I are also going to see fireworks tomorrow night with our kids at one of the local parks. That is the plan for tomorrow. Yes, tomorrow there is a live stream at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It will be a question and answer live stream. You can ask me anything you want. Sadly, it will most likely be inside because they're calling for lots of rain tomorrow. That might have changed. Let me just check. Saturday, 30% chance of showers, 40% later in the morning. Chance of a thunderstorm in the morning. I think I will most likely be inside tomorrow. From Eugene from Automation Secure Home. I have fireworks and performance at 10 parks in my city. Yes. Thankfully, we got a lot of rain in Ontario. so it's not too dry. So in our part of Ontario, we can go and see fireworks, but in northern Ontario, where my brother lives, they can't. There's a fireworks ban because it's too dry. They don't want to start fires, obviously, up there. Freddie Wolf, the most important part on a car are the wheels and the tires. Imagine if we didn't invent them. That would be weird because it's such a smooth ride. Like when you're driving around and it just, I can't imagine what it would be like if we didn't have wheels and tires. Key Park says Happy Canada Day. Thank you very much. Dave found the lesson about tools. So if you do want a follow-up lesson, that's there. And Lolly says Happy Canada Day. Thank you very much. Let me get to another question here. A few more. Leo, hi Bob. Is it mandatory in Canada when people are getting their driver's license to know about all these parts, or is it just something that a good driver should know? If you own a car, you should know the names for most of these parts. If you want to understand what your mechanic is telling you, or if you're someone who likes to fix things themselves. For my kids, I feel like it's important that they know some of the parts of the engine. They don't need to know how to fix it. But if they own a car someday and the mechanic says, oh, the ignition switch isn't working because the wiring harness underneath is disconnected, I would want them to know what that means. If someone said, oh, it was just a fuse, or the bearings have worn out in your rim, you don't need to be able to fix it, but you should know what the mechanic is talking about. John from Brazil says, don't forget to give this great lesson a thumbs up. Thanks, John, for reminding people. Hobart, hello, Bob. Bolt and nut go together. Is there any torque? So when you tighten a nut onto a bolt, you tighten it until it won't turn anymore. But you can also torque the nut. That's where you measure how tight it is with a special wrench called a torque wrench. I don't have a torque wrench, but my son has a torque wrench. So he can decide how tight he wants the nut to be. He can set that, and then his torque wrench will put it that tight. That was a pretty technical description, but I think because I live on a farm, I might have access to more tools than some people. Noboru, hi Bob. How do you describe the end of the cable of a laptop or computer? Is it called connector or socket? What is the part called that is connected to the power outlet? So here we call a lot of things the plug. The thing I put into the wall, I call that part the plug, and I put it into the socket or outlet. We most often put a plug into, so if this is my plug, it goes into an outlet. That's how I would describe it. On my laptop, we also often call the holes on a laptop ports. So even though it is technically a socket, we would probably call it a port or jack. So you have a headphone jack, a USB port. That's how I would refer to those. They are kind of sockets, but that's what I would call it. And then yes, the thing that goes in would just be the connector, the USB connector, etc., etc. Clive, hi Bob. Can you help to explain what is the difference between parts and components? Thanks. So parts are probably the smallest pieces. Components themselves can have parts in them. So a screw or bolt would be a part. A shaft or chain would be a part. But an ignition switch might be a component because it actually has other stuff in it. You could also call it a part, but definitely they're very, very similar. There's a lot of components in a car. There are a lot of parts in a car. Yeah, I would say they're almost equal, and parts is a little more common. Brent says, a torque wrench? Wow, I don't think I even own a wrench. Brent, everyone should have a good wrench set. How are you going to put the wheel back on your lawnmower if it breaks? Then Brent says, if I do own a wrench, I know I won't be able to find it when I need it. Yes, that is the problem with tools. Sometimes you leave them in the last place where you use them. And then New Words with MP says, what is called the process when we connect the tap to the pipe? We would just say you connect it. So I don't want to go into too many details because I'm not good at plumbing, but if you have a pipe, you would put a tap on the end. We would just use the general verb put. Let's see here. Kukubi from Japan. Thank you, as always, for your useful lessons. Modern cars have a puncture repair kit instead of a spare tire. I don't like it, but what do you think? I just like putting a spare tire on. There's something simple about it. You get out, you take the tire off, well, you jack the van up. But yes, I don't know. I haven't tried a puncture repair kit yet. I will have to try one someday. Freddie Wolf says, is there a reason that a washer is called like this? Or yeah, that's quite weird. I would have thought more that a washer washes things. Yeah, it is a weird word, but it is called a washer. And I don't know why it's called that, but it certainly is a strange name for it. Hey, I'm going to turn off members only chat and we're going to finish this lesson off. Give me 1 second here. Where is that button? Go back to subscriber only mode and I will keep moving on. Eugene says, I have 10 toolboxes. I have quite a few too. I have one for screwdrivers, one for sockets and wrenches, one for pliers, but my tools aren't always in my toolboxes. Let's go back to the lesson, everybody. I'm done questions from the chat and I'm done questions from the forum. So we are going to finish this off. So when you have electricity, you have to protect things from getting overloaded. The way we do that is by using something called a fuse or a breaker. So what this does is I'm not going to go into too many details, but it protects things from being overloaded. So this top fuse has actually blown. You can see that there's a little bit of dark inside because the tiny wire in the fuse burnt because the system was overloaded. This is what a car fuse looks like in Canada, in North America. Sometimes on a car, your headlights don't work or your signal lights don't work, and you need to check the fuse box to see if you see the little fuses in there, if one of these fuses has blown. Okay, so once again, when a fuse is overloaded, the fuse will blow, and you would need to check your fuse box. We also use these in our houses. In our houses, we used to have fuses in Canada 30 or 40 years ago, but now we have what are called breakers. It does the same job as a fuse, but you can reset it instead of replacing it, which is quite handy. So a little more technical, the rotor is the part of a brake that the shiny silver part. The caliper is the thing that grabs the rotor, and the brake pads are inside the caliper because you don't want the caliper to wear out. So when you go get your brakes fixed, sometimes you need new rotors. It's rare, but sometimes the mechanic will say your rotors are warped or your rotors are getting thin. On some vehicles, you might also call this a disc. The caliper, when you press the brake pedal, inside this red part, it grabs the wheel. You know how the brakes work on a bicycle? They work pretty much the same way on a car if you have disc brakes. It grabs the rotor and it slows the car down. And then here, the brake pads will slowly wear out. They're designed to wear out. So if you take care of your car, occasionally you'll have to replace brake pads. Every once in a while, if you wait too long, you might have to replace rotors and calipers too. Never fun. It's not expensive to replace brake pads. It's quite expensive to replace those. This is just a knob. A knob is anything that you turn. I put this on here because the seat on my tractor has a knob. And if I turn the knob, the seat goes up. If I turn the knob the other way, the seat goes down. So Dave says, my mom's car had warped rotors a few years ago and we had to get them replaced. Yes, we quite often have to replace brake rotors because we brake really hard because we live out in the country. And we often have the vans loaded with either all of our kids or flowers. So a lot of weight as well. Thanks for that comment, Dave. Universal joint. So now I'm getting super technical, but a universal joint, this is for all the engineers and farmers and mechanics out there. A universal joint is a special joint that allows two shafts to connect at an angle, and that angle can change and it won't wreck anything. It won't break anything. So a universal joint, it's kind of like doing this with your hands, and now you can turn, but you can also go in every direction. It's kind of universal. So if you don't think you have one, you do on your vehicle somewhere. A drive shaft is the shaft that takes power from the front of a vehicle to the back. If you have a rear wheel drive car, if you look underneath, there will be a drive shaft. It will bring power from the transmission and engine from the front to the back of your vehicle. If you have a front wheel drive car, you probably have a little drive shaft going to each front tire, but that is a drive shaft. Anytime we join two tires together with a shaft or rod, you could use either word here, we call it an axle. So you have axles on vehicles. It's probably more common to have an axle on a trailer or a truck. Not to get into too many details, but most vehicles have four-wheel independent suspension. A long time ago, I think the wheels on each side were connected together with an axle, but that's a little more rare now. Pretty common though on a trailer, I think. And then this is the hub. The hub is the spot where you put the tire on the vehicle. So when you put a tire on a vehicle, you put it on the hub and then you tighten up the nuts. This is a rim. So the rim is the part of the tire that doesn't have rubber. This is the tire. Although we do use tire to talk about the whole part, the rim and the rubber, we call that a tire sometimes, but technically this is the tire. And then this is a hubcap. I just lost another hubcap from my red van. I lost a hubcap a few weeks ago and replaced it. And now I noticed that the front hubcap is gone. It fell off and it went somewhere. The hubcap is the last thing you put on, and it just makes the wheels on the vehicle look much nicer. Anytime you have a door, it will most likely have some kind of hinge. So on your vehicle, there is a hinge that allows the door to open. The part where the door is connected to the vehicle is a hinge. So that is just a really cool thing that allows one part to move while the other part doesn't. So almost every door in the world has a hinge of some kind where the door is connected to the wall or the vehicle or whatever else it is on. So this is a battery terminal. By the way, the gold part here is the connector, but where the orange arrow is pointing is called the terminal. We sometimes call it a battery post as well, but mostly we call it a terminal. There's a positive terminal and a negative terminal. This, I believe, is the positive terminal because it has the red wire going to it. But yes, if you look at a battery, any kind of battery, even a small battery, it will have terminals or ends, and one will be positive. But in a car, we generally call it a battery terminal or the battery post. Sometimes you don't want stuff to get into a machine, so there is a screen in front. Screens are usually made out of metal, but they can be made out of other things. You can see that this person was working somewhere where they didn't want grass to enter the machine. They didn't want grass to enter the tractor. So there is a screen at the front. This is different than, what happened there? Oh yeah, I got to do this. This is different than a filter. There, I'm back on track now. There were so many vocab words, I had to have two different slideshows. So anyways, a filter is usually made out of fiber or something a little smaller. and it's used to keep things clean as well. You can filter the air. You also can filter oil to keep it clean. But this is just a screen made of metal. It's usually on the outside. On the inside, you might have a filter to keep the air clean or to keep the oil clean. This is a spark plug. When electricity goes in one end, a spark comes out the other end. This is what allows your engine to run. If your spark plugs are working properly, your car will start and it will drive. It's the thing that ignites the gas and air mixture. So spark plugs are very important to have a good working vehicle. Suspension is what we use to refer to everything that holds a tire on a vehicle. There are different parts though. There are springs and shock absorbers in your suspension, but this is a good word to know because if you do get a vehicle fixed, the mechanic might say, oh, you need to replace a shock absorber. Your back suspension isn't working properly. So again, suspension is everything that holds the tire on. The shock absorber, the spring, all of those parts are called the suspension. It's what makes the car smooth when you drive. And it's because there are springs and shock absorbers. It's a little different on each vehicle, but that is what allows your car to be enjoyable to ride in. That's the highly technical, more technical than I expected lesson on parts. I do know though that 90% of these words are important for you to know if you ever need to be able to talk about a vehicle with someone. If a friend said, oh, my car was in the garage and it cost a fortune to get it fixed, you could say, what was wrong with it? And the friend might say, oh, it needed new filters. It needed a new bearing on the front. It needed a new belt on the engine. Like if you ever ask someone about how they got something repaired, they will probably tell you. Anyways, I'm sure this lesson will be very popular when I create a shorter version. So I will create a shorter version that will come out in a few days. And it will probably be very popular with mechanics, engineers, farmers, people who fix things will probably enjoy this lesson a lot. You, though, should still watch it one more time. It's always good to watch it twice. Anyways, I'm going to wrap this up. There is a live lesson tomorrow at 10 a.m. It will most likely be inside. Sorry, it will probably be spitting or raining out tomorrow. So please do come and watch it. And what else do I normally say at the end? Bye? I guess I do. Let me read some of the chat. Let's see here. Key Park says, hard to remember. I know someone earlier commented, Vitor said, awesome lesson. Key Park said, universal joint is the favorite word in today's lesson. It's a good word. Sean says, it's too much mechanical vocabulary that I don't know. It is a lot of new vocabulary for some of you. I will admit that. Reddy Wolf, lately I watched a similar video which came from a French teacher from Quebec. Even I thought they used more French words. Oddly, the mechanic used a huge amount of English words for the car parts. That's probably because in order to order parts, we often order our car parts from the US, from the United States. We make a lot of car parts in Canada, but a lot of those car parts go straight to the US to make new vehicles. But a lot of the parts needed for repair come from the US. So I had my tractor fixed last year and I had to wait for it. It needed a new, the shaft that connects the four-wheel drive at the front was broken. And I had to wait for a part to come from the US. So I think my guess would be a lot of mechanics in Quebec order parts in English. So they just start using those words. Let's see here. Brent says, see ya. Key Park says, thanks, Bob. Huawei says, I don't know many words. We'll watch again tomorrow. Good plan. John Wedge says, hello, folks. Just come to say goodbye. Thanks, John. I'll watch later. Hello and bye to John Wedge. So anyways, thanks for being here. Thanks to Irina, Denis, Vladimir, Key Park, Unsel. Unsel says, I love listening to technical topics. Also, every topic you talk about becomes very enjoyable. Well, thanks, Unsel. I'm glad you found it useful. And then perfect vocab. Thanks for the lesson. That's exactly what I wanted to learn. And that's from someone where I have to do a translate here. Give me a second. Sometimes I don't know the names. From Alexander. So you are welcome, Alexander. Let's see here. Oh, John says he's going to go watch with Mr. Brent. Good plan. Freddie says, salut Bob, un grand merci, et à demain, par conséquent, avec plaisir. Yeah, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye, bye, bye. I'll just say bye. Bye to everyone. Have a great day. Do come and watch this lesson when you see the shorter version. I'm sure you will enjoy it. Thanks to Dave for moderating the chat. And Dave, I think, might not be here tomorrow. We'll see. We might not have a moderator. It might be crazy. Who knows? We'll see. Anyways, thanks for watching, everybody. Have a great weekend. Have a great day. See you tomorrow. And enjoy time with friends or family or just hanging out by yourself, whatever you do.